Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial's set correctly to USA Prepares. And we're broadcasting 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. We have a call-in line if you'd like to call us. 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. And telephone listen line. Now, I don't know if it's up and running properly or not at this point, but let me give it to you. 605-477-3249. 605-477-3249. There's a link to your instructors on the website, usaprepares.com, the instructors tab. With us today, Rich Scheben, live in Montana. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Vincent. Always an honor to be on your show, sir.
I'll tell you a funny story. It's great to hear your voice, Rich Scheben. So, I got a number of calls here at the farmhouse, and some of our class were saying, hey, you know, the telephone listen line's not working quite right. As a matter of fact, it's been rebroadcasting the same broadcast for days now. Just wanted to let you know. And also, calls went into the network, GCN, and they heard the same thing. So I got on the computer, and I sent an email, and I just typed in very simply, George, just wanted to let you know. Now, George is the senior engineer, and he's in charge of these kinds of things. And he's in charge of something called traffic. Now, traffic is news and commercials and programming that what you hear, the timing of it, those kinds of things, George is in charge of. And so I've talked to George on the phone, and he's going to come on the air with us one of these days. And I said in this email to George, just wanted to let you know that the telephone listen line is replaying the same broadcast over and over and has been for days. Can you fix it? And thank you very much, Vincent Finelli. And so I went to the line where you type in the address of who you're going to send this to. And I typed in. Now I know what the address is, and it starts out with the word traffic. So I typed in TRA, and then boom, the software Thunderbird automatically filled it in, and I said send. Simple as that. Done. Well, I got an email back, and the email back said, I'm very, very sorry. It was a really humble apology. Very sorry that this happened. But I don't know what you're talking about. Who's George? I'm thinking, wow, how can this be? How is it possible that GCN doesn't know who George is? And then it's signed by a guy I never heard of before. I sent the email to the wrong address. Now, who did I send it to? To a radio station that fired me.
Oh, hilarious.
Yeah. And the guy said to me, and what's USA Prepares anyway? Never heard of it. So I sent him another email as soon as I got that one, and I said, I'm very sorry. Please disregard, this. It was sent to the wrong address. And as soon as I sent it, I got another one back from the same guy. It's like, who's Vin Finelli? And who's USA Prepares? Nobody here's heard of it. And that is really funny because we were, a couple of years ago, before we got summarily dismissed, we were their number one broadcast, even more listeners than Rush Limbaugh, at least according to the engineer. And that's because I complained a lot. Well, I won't say complained. I exposed a lot about the city corruption. And anyway, so I think I opened up an old wound, and I got to stay away from Springfield for a few more weeks. But anyway, that's what happened. And yeah, I did it to myself, and it's my fault. So I was last evening and yesterday, Rich Scheben, I was helping a fellow farmer and one of our instructors. He lives about 50 miles away from here, from our farmhouse. And I was teaching him a little bit about electricity and watts and amps and volts and consumption. And so we're sitting at his kitchen counter, and I had a piece of paper and a pen. And I was writing, and I said, well, let's talk about this. Let's make sure you're prepared for a power outage. And I said, now, I know you have a generator. He said, yes, it's 4,000 watts, and it's gasoline powered. And I said, and I know you have an inverter, and it's 2,000 watts. So let's implement that into your electrical wiring system so that when the power fails, you've got, a good, quick solution that's all ready to go wired in. So let's talk about minimum essential electrical loads. What is the absolute minimum that you can stand being with when the power goes out? Now, you've done this yourself, haven't you, Rich?
Well, my system's slightly more sophisticated because I'm not on the grid and looking for a backup plan. But my whole system is me making my own electricity with solar and a generator backup, which I haven't had to use yet this year. But when I pull up water, obviously I'm banking amps and volts in my battery system. So it all depends on what your needs are. If you're looking for, sounds to me like your friend there is looking for a plan B backup, which means he's on the grid.
Yes, he is.
And not looking for a primary energy source without a backup. So
that's correct.
It all depends on what your needs are. I have the 675 amp hour system, which is on the small side, but it's easier to fill up during the short winter days when it's cloudy with a generator if I need that AC backup and bank as DC in my batteries. So, just to go off into a little tangent, Vincent, we've talked about I know we're a lot of us using lead-acid deep cycle batteries, and you've got something slightly different, but there's also those nickel-ion batteries, which I think you're using, and there's also the Chinese batteries, the silicon salts, and now there's a new lithium battery that's even more sophisticated from what I'm hearing than the silicon salts from China. And you can go all the way down to like 10 or 20% of battery capacity and not hurt your shelf life of the battery. So the sophistication of off-grid living and energy storage is getting pretty impressive, Vince.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And the discussion at my friend, the instructor, and I were having revolved around what is the minimum load that we can get by with, okay, so that you don't have to buy more equipment. And it's just how can we make this inverter work you already have, it's 2,000 watts, and how can we make the generator work that's 4,000 watts? So we looked at his kitchen, and I said, it seems to me like this is the hub of activity in his farmhouse, and that the first thing that'll happen when the power goes out is you want to get some lights on. Now, fortunately, he has already wired in LED lighting. So he has about 10 lights that he needs to power up, and they are LED. So they're between 10 and 13 watts apiece, between 9 and 13 watts apiece. So we calculated that load, and it's about 200 watts if you put it all together. And then I said, okay, what about the information? Are you interested in knowing what's happening if that's available, like the internet and television and so forth? He has a a dish for satellite internet. So we talked about that, and we're going to need a couple hundred more watts to power that equipment. So now we're up to 300 watts. And then we thought, okay, we could, if it's the wintertime, we can do without the refrigeration for a while, because just put everything outside, okay, if it's going to be cold out of the sun. And so what is the next most important thing? And that's water. And he has a well. But that darn well pump is going to take about 3,200 watts to start.
How much horsepower is his well, Vince?
Well, it's... I'm thinking it's about 1 horsepower, maybe 1.5. Now, of course, I'm estimating. It's a well that's about 200 feet deep. So I'm thinking it's at least a horsepower. Okay, so 746 watts is a horsepower. But I'm thinking it's going to take 2 or 3 times that 746 watts to start the well pump. Okay, initially. Now you add that up, and he is actually past the capacity of his generator, because even if his generator is rated at 4,000 watts, it's really not 4,000. That would be like peak power. But I'm thinking that realistically, if he gets 75% of that 4,000 watts, he's doing well, and that's 3,000 watts. So literally, he's a little bit past where he needs to be in terms of current for that generator. But once he pumps his water, he can store some water and then not have to worry about using that 3,200 watts to pump water until later. Okay? So that's the way to, and that's what you do, right? You get all your water pumped for a while, and maybe you go a week or two on the water that you pump, right? And then you pump more water
I have
later.
a gravity feed, and I'll, at this time of year, because I'm not watering our garden's pretty much done for the year, we'll water the cabinet about once a month. And we use gravity feed to wash the dishes and to fill up the reservoir on the wood cook stove.
Yeah. Now, the point that we're trying to make, class, is it's cheap to store water. It's almost free, as long as it's above where you need it, in height. It's hard to store the electricity to pump the water whenever you feel like it. So you pump the water when you can, and then you let gravity deliver the water to you. We'll be right back. Class, Rich Scheben's with us, and we're talking about something that we didn't plan on talking about, but I wanted to go through these very simple calculations with you so you can understand what it would be like if you decided to do some off-grid living, or partially off-grid living, or supplement your on-grid living with Plan B. So, Rich, you have a battery bank. It's lead acid, and it's I believe you said 675 ampere hours, right?
Correct.
Now, theoretically, class, what that means is if Rich wanted to drain his battery bank from 100% full, brand new batteries in peak condition to empty, he could take 675 amperes out of them. But you really should never do that, because if you take your batteries to the dead condition, you have permanently destroyed them, and they will never come back to that full capability after you do that. And that's why if you have a car that has trouble starting, and you turn the ignition switch to start the engine, and it goes, you're killing the battery. And the next time you go to charge it, it will never come back to where it was before. And each time you run it down, it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's why you end up buying a new battery, because it can't come back, because you've destroyed it, because you've taken it below the safe depth of discharge. Now, typically on a lead acid battery, you really don't want to go below 20% discharged, meaning you'd only want to use the top 20% of the charge. Now, Rich, is your system a 24-volt system?
It is.
Okay, so I did a quick calculation during the break, and I figured out 675 ampere hours, and if you were able to discharge them 20% from the top, down 20%, meaning you have 80% left, and you don't want to go below having 80% left, that's 135 ampere hours times 24 volts is 3,240 watts. That means that you can withdraw from your battery bank 3,240 watts before you recharge it. Now, hopefully tomorrow is a sunny day and your solar panels will recharge the battery bank again. So you are living with about 3,240 watts. Is that right, per day, per sunny day?
Yes. But keep in mind, when you live off grid, use deep cycle and not shallow cycle like you do in a car to start with, where you need high amperage to start your vehicle. When you have deep cycle, you need every 7 to 8 days, you have to fill up your batteries to full or almost full. And that's where my tri-meter comes in. So technically, when you live off grid, folks, you do not need to fill up your batteries this amount every day. It's only every 7 to 8 days. So you can do it in small increments depending on how low your sun is at that time of year, how much clouds you have. So far this year, knock on wood, I have not had to run my generator to charge my batteries or to make them full. So it all depends on seasonality and the weather in your area and for that particular 7 to 8 day period, Vince.
Yeah, and what I try to do, class, and I'm sure Rich does the same thing, if it's sunny, heck, top them off. You know, top off your batteries and do the things that you would want extra electricity for while you have it, because it's expensive to store electricity, meaning the battery bank is an expensive component of your system. Now, with this, and here's where I'm going with this 3,240 watts, Rich Scheben. When we were looking at, and that's for 1 hour. That means that he has 3,240 watts for 1 hour, and that's it, unless he wants to damage his batteries, assuming they were fully charged when he started. So we were going through lighting, okay, and we figured that we were going to use in this kitchen of this farmhouse that my friend and his wife owns, we were going to use 100 watts. That's 100 watts per hour. So if we're 5 hours of evening usage of electricity to see what they're doing, that's 5 hours times 100 watts, or 500 watts. Subtract that from the 3,240 watts, and that's what he has left. Now, if he has 5 hours of television, you know, with the router and the TV screen and this, you know, the sound system, plus the satellite router, now you're looking at 200 watts per hour times 5 hours. That's 1,000 watts. So what I was doing with him is going through these kinds of calculations to show him how much energy he had, and what we found out was very, very quickly. I mean, within seconds. Well, it doesn't look like that stove is going to be very useful. Why? It's an electric stove, and it's 30 amperes. 30 amp stove. And that's just the cooktop. Then the oven is like another 30. So, and then you got the dishwasher and the refrigerator. So when you put it all together, an electric house is really, really hard to power with off-grid energy. When we come back, I want to ask Rich about lighting. We'll be right back. Class, Rich Scheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. And who to know better than what off-grid living is like? And Rich Scheben, I don't know. Rich Scheben literally lives off-grid, heats with wood, cooks with wood, runs a generator when he needs to. Otherwise, it's solar power. And Rich, so where I was going with this whole discussion about watts is about lighting. And, you know, the more watts your devices consume, the shorter you get to use them on any given day, you know, depending on your battery bank. But for sure, the faster you use, the more watts you use, the faster you use up what you do have. And so just as an example, in the studio where I am right now, and you've been in the studio at the farmhouse, I have 4 can lights, or 4 recessed lights. And now initially they were populated with 75-watt incandescent bulbs. So that consumed 300 watts. And it would light up the studio. Then I replaced them with compact fluorescent lights, and the total power consumption went down to 104 watts. And then I really wanted more light, so I replaced them with long tube fluorescent lights, and further reduced the power down to 80 watts, but it really wasn't that bright. Then I built a LED 12-volt lighting strips, and that worked pretty well. And I don't have the wattage, but it's probably around 120 watts. Finally, the current version of what I'm doing is I used, because we have can lights or recessed lighting for these fixtures in the studio, I replaced them with 13-watt LED retrofit lights, and they look like floodlights, but they replaced the light bulb that would go in the can. And they're 13 watts apiece, so 4 of them is 52 watts, and they light up the studio just fine. So what I've done is I've reduced my power consumption, reduced it, ultimately have the right amount of light at the lowest number of watts to deliver that light. So that's what I have done, and I've done the same thing in the kitchen. Now the question I have for you is, what do you do for lighting, and how did you figure out what the best way for you is?
Well, to me, it's pretty. I'm not trying to be condescending to the audience, but I don't use the term wattage. Wattage, volts, and amps, they're all interrelated. You can use math formulas to figure out each one, but I try to do everything in amps because my system, the off-grid system, should be measured in amp hours, basically battery storage for voltage and amps. So that being said, I have a trimeter, and a lot of sophisticated off-grid living today, it's all built into one device, like your inverter charger, solar controller, trimeter. It's all in one device now. So I've been living off-grid for over 10 years, so mine's all separate. So that being said, I look at everything in amps. So even though I can change my trimeter to see other units of measure, I keep it in amps to keep it simple for me. So I know how many amps are coming in via the sun or my generator usage, and I know how many amps are being used from my cabin, so I can keep it in a very simple terms, just like when you gave the example, Vince, earlier of you, I tried to keep it above 80% capacity, in other words, not use less than 20%. That's exactly right, 135 amps. So I always keep an eye on that. So to answer your question specifically, I use LEDs and CFL lights. Now, if we have a really cloudy winter, okay, like, for example, if it's really a warm winter, we have lots of clouds, in lieu of a colder winter is going to have more sun, and I'm not getting the amp hours or the power coming in, I have no problem using kerosene lights or wearing a headlamp in the cabin. I have no problem with that at all. So there's so many sophisticated ways to reduce your lighting or your power. I do not have a TV, haven't had a television over 10 years. I get 99% of my information off of credible internet sites like USAPrepares.com. And I am not really that much into entertainment. We're watching a movie now and then. I'll watch an NFL game now and then, but I'll be honest with you, the NFL has absolutely turned me off, and I'm probably watching 95% less NFL football today than I did in past years because of all this political correctness and crap that's going on. So there's so many ways to reduce your power usage. Computers are pretty much LED lighting. They don't take much power at all. So get rid of the TV, turn off lights in parts of your home that you're not using. A lot of it's common sense and logic, Vincent.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and it absolutely frosts me when I drive past these, I will call them very, very modest homes, and that's being very kind. And I'll see that 100-watt porch light on all day, all night, and I know that some of us are going to end up paying for those lights that are left on carelessly, day after day after day after day, because the people who live there just don't seem to care. And, when they default on their electric bills, and we get to pick up, paying for that. And it just frosts me because I do exactly what you do. If I'm not in that room, that light is off. If there's a fan that needs to run, like we have a bathroom that has a fan to remove the moisture from, when you take a shower, well, that runs just until that moisture is removed to prevent mold from growing. It's not left running, all day. It's just not. So we're very careful with electricity. And when you live off-grid class, you will be even more careful. Because what you'll find out is that first time that you go, well, what? It's dark, and, we need some light. And you go, well, we just don't have it because we used it up. And maybe we could have been a little more judicious with the use of electricity. And that's the way Rich Scheben lives, and that's the way we live. And But what I really wanted to talk to him about, and he answered the question, was the kind of lighting that he uses. Because I know for a fact that he figured out the best system for lighting for him. You know, I'm sure that he thought and researched and figured out what is the best way to go, and we just heard it. For him, it's LED lighting and CFL, compact fluorescent lights. Rich Scheben, have you noticed, do you have any lights that are compact fluorescent where the bulb is in upside down, as in a can light? Do you have any of that style lighting?
I did have those, and I replaced those with LEDs, and we still have a few CFLs around the cabin, but we're trying to get off of CFLs and go onto LEDs. But I have found that CFL lights actually have a longer shelf life than LEDs, and they should be the opposite. So
they should be.
Yeah.
All right. Here's what I've determined, and maybe this jives, and maybe we should share this for our class. What I found out is that if you take a compact fluorescent light, we're talking about the curlicues, and you screw it in with the base down, meaning the base is at the bottom and the glass is at the top, the bulb will last longer than if you screw it in with the base up and the glass down. So the cooler they run, the more air to cool them off, the more air to circulate around them, the longer they last. Now, they last a really long time if they are sideways. So if you have a sconce and air can get, underneath them and the heat will rise from them, they can last years. Now, if you put them in a can, like we have in our kitchen and we have throughout the rest of the house, where the heat gets trapped in the can, they don't last very long at all. So when they claim a compact fluorescent light can last 7 years, if you put it upside down in a can light, it might last a year. And how do I know? Because I would take a pencil and I would write on the base of the bulb, on the porcelain part, when I installed it. And I'd be shocked at how short the life is. So what I'm saying is the hotter they run, the shorter the life. And how do you make them run hot? You put them in upside down, or you put them in a closed fixture. So if you have a fixture with a lampshade and they're screwed with the base to the bottom, they'll last a lot longer than they will if they're in that same bulb as in a can light. So I wanted to share that. Now the LEDs, same thing. They can run really hot too. As a matter of fact, the base is the heat sink of an LED A19 bulb. A19 is the style of the base, that screw-in part that's typically made out of aluminum. That style that you're used to using, the standard size bulb base, is known as A19, A19, also known as the Edison base. Those are synonyms. And if you have an LED light very close to the base of a A19 or Edison bulb is the heat sink, and they get really, really hot. So hot, you can't touch them. So what I try to do is put them in fixtures where they'll have some air to let them run a little bit cooler. And if I can't do that, what I do is I bought some porcelain A19 or Edison bulb extenders. They're about 1.25 inches long. They're made out of porcelain, and I screw them into the socket, and then I screw the bulb into them. So it gives a little bit more room for air to cool off the bulb, and they last about twice as long. So those are my thoughts on bulbs. Any comments or questions, Rich, on what I've said?
No, I agree with everything you said. In fact, we've been living off grid for over 10 years, and I have some CFLs that are still haven't burned out yet. Now, they say when a CFL burns out, you need a hazmat suit to clean it up. And that's one of the reasons that we're going from CFL to LEDs. But the CFL, we started with a bunch of CFLs, and we haven't used them up yet. And so we're pretty frugal. I look at it as, when you look at amps or volts in the battery, I look at it as money in the bank. If you don't have it, you don't spend it. It's the same thing when you live off grid. If you are low in your batteries, then you need to think of alternative plans to limit your usage for power. And it's just that simple.
Mm-hmm. My dad and mom were children of the Great Depression, the first Great Depression. And my dad would say things like, we don't throw it out until it's absolutely, positively used up. And there's no other use for it after it's been used up. Now, if there's another use for it after it's been used up, you you put it to that use before you throw it away. And that was instilled in my thought process from a very young age, and that's kind of the way I am. And I know
that's
you are
very
too.
good advice.
Yeah. When we come back, let's talk about our loss of freedoms and liberty and prosperity. Rich Scheben's with us, and offgridmontana.com. Offgridmontana.com is his website. And that's the place where you can get his book. I have a copy. One New York Man's Journey to Off-Grid Living in Montana. It's a book of how it is, what to expect, and his experiences. I think you'll find it quite fascinating. So, Rich, I want to share this with you before we get into our main topic of today, which is who's to blame for our loss of freedoms, liberty, and prosperity. During last week, at the end of the last week, I was talking with our engineer. His name is Patrick, and I am really fortunate here at USA Prepares. We have wonderful engineers. I love them all. I really do. Nathan is our engineer this morning. Patrick was our engineer on Friday, and I said, during the break, I try to chat with him and just to catch up on what's new and happening in their lives and so forth. And I said, I'll bet the break room at GCN is a lot of fun where you guys all get together and kind of laugh about what happened during the day, and you get to talk about your the hosts and things that have happened. And he said, yeah, it's really a lot of fun. And I said, so do you guys agree or disagree with the hosts, and how's that work? And he said, I'm paraphrasing. They agree and disagree with the host. And then he told me that, he said, Vinny, I don't agree with everything you say. And my response is something like, what? You're kidding. Are you serious? How did that happen? So, and I said, so give me an example. And he was talking about the millennials. And he said, he disagrees with, a number of things that I say about the millennials. And, I'm kind of speechless here. Good thing we were off the air because it would have been dead air. But he was telling me that he disagrees with some of the things I say about the millennials and how he says they're bright and they're creative and so forth. And I said, I'll tell you what, how about you come on the air with me on Friday? And we'll talk about it. So we're going to have a shootout on Friday, hour number 2. So class, if you'd like to call in, you have something, pro or con to say about millennials. Do you agree with me? Do you think I'm, off my rocker? Do you think Patrick's right? Certainly feel free to call in. That's on Friday, and that number is 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. So I just wanted to share that little story with you, Rich Scheben, that I was quite surprised that we have an engineer who doesn't agree with many of the things that I say on the air. I thought everybody agreed. Not true.
No. Well, there's a direct proportion to listening skills, how much you read, and reading objective facts in lieu of subjective emotional opinion. And I remember I've cited this on the air on your show, on many radio shows, and I'm going to paraphrase a study that I read years ago. There's a 901 ratio of people as they get older who are liberal, who go to conservative side because they get more mature, they read more, they're more informative, and most younger people, aka millennials, are probably more on the liberal side because they have not gotten those life experiences or read as much, etc. So there's a direct proportion to information and maturity and leaning more towards the conservative side. So that being said, would you mind, Vince, if I just go into our topic of the day?
Yeah, please do.
Super. Okay. Well, folks, I just want to cite 3 articles right now. I'm going to do it really quick. First of all, and they're on official sites like Zero Hedge, and I can hear the music coming up, but I'm going to start with the title, Full Censorship Now Official in Germany. And I'm just going to go through 3 articles very quickly and then comment on them to show how our freedoms, liberties, and prosperity, especially for the bottom 93%, is degrading rapidly.
Yeah, okay. So when we come back after top of the hour news and commercial announcements, we're going to be talking about censorship and how we've lost our freedoms, our liberty, and prosperity. It's all true. It's all true. And Rich Scheben is going to delineate exactly why and how this happened. Please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. You know, Rich Scheben, I wanted to tell you that we got promoted a couple of weeks ago. I got a call from John Statmiller. I was not at the farmhouse at the time, and I called him back last night. And he said, yeah, we were on this broadcast, this very broadcast that you and I are on Monday through Friday. It's carried in its entirety on another network, Republic Broadcasting. And we were on from 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 to 8 a.m., opening the business day at Republic Broadcasting. Well, we just got promoted a couple weeks ago, and we are now on from 1 o'clock in the afternoon to 3 in the afternoon. So I just want to say thank you so much to John Statmiller for carrying this broadcast. And so, Rich Scheben, you and I are on Genesis, where we originate our broadcast, and it goes out over AM and FM and satellite, and it ends up on YouTube and podcasts and telephone listen line and all that, and Republic Broadcasting. So thank you so much, John Statmiller, for continuing to carry us and putting us on at 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoons. So I just wanted to mention that. Pretty neat, huh, Rich?
It is neat, and you deserve it, Vince. And I think the public is waking up to the false narratives and the top-down centralized control of the police state and everything else that's happening from the top down, and people want to control their own destiny.
Yeah. So, Rich, in terms of our loss of freedoms, liberties, and prosperity, who's to blame for all this in your
Yeah, let me give a monologue that answers that question, Vince, and thank you for your time on this. First of all, I'm going to cite 3 articles that I've read already this morning. Germany, full censorship now official. I'm just going to read a couple of bullet points. Germany has made no secret of its desire to see its new law copied by the rest of the EU, when employees of social media companies are appointed as the state's private thought police and given the power to shape the form of current political and cultural discourse by deciding who shall be allowed to speak and what to say and who shall be shut down. Free speech becomes nothing more than a fairy tale. Or is that perhaps the point? Fighting Islamophobia is now higher priority than fighting terrorism. So basically what the powers that be are doing is they've bought and paid for the elite who control social media platforms, such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. And what they're doing is they're making it so the average Joe can no longer voice their opinion. And as you know, free speech, including the Bill of Rights and our Constitution, is a law given to us by our founding fathers. Another article I want to refer to is retiring later and dying sooner because of obesity, drugs, alcohol, and they're citing in this article that it's good for the pension plans that more people are dying because the pensions are in the red. And folks, this is one of the reasons why the EU, I feel, is going to break up, whether it be Catalonia from Spain, Brexit. Italy's going to go there, and that's why the AfD party in Germany is getting so popular, because the people are not being able to control their own destiny. And what we need to do is to stop letting the fox guard the henhouse. Here's another article. Robert Mueller invested in hedge funds linked to Russia and George Soros. Basically, he's had complex financial entanglements, which include investments linked to George Soros and Russia. And we all know that Robert Mueller is investigating President Trump. So it's basically a small group of elite people who are trying to normalize things for their benefit because they have an addiction to power, money, and control. Now, addiction is a very strong thing. And when these behaviors keep going on, everything gets on the chopping block and the wrong things get normalized. Now, most of us are, probably all of us, are imperfect sinners. No one's perfect. But it's getting to the point where we've had millions of people die for the freedoms and liberties of our country, and they're still doing so today, and America is being dismissed with these politically correct terms like nationalism, which is basically Americanism, okay? Now, some of the things that's going to be normalized or on the chopping block is going to be things like China-style communism, the new police state of censorship and surveillance, like I just talked about a few moments ago, legal murder with AIDS in California. Now, think about the term legal murder. That's a contradiction in terms, don't you think? Financial, economic confiscation or poverty for the bottom 93%. The continued fascism of the big corporate oligarchies in bed with big government, protected by the mainstream media and the court system. Now, speaking of the court system, you've heard this narrative for how long about killing cops from the top down? Follow the money, folks. Follow the narrative, follow the meme, follow the theme, follow the microphone, talking points. It doesn't matter. Are you ever going to hear an approval by the elite saying, let's kill the lawyers, judges, and bankers? I don't think so, because they are way more deserving than the cops, the grunts on the street who's just trying to do their job. Father, mother, husband, wife, boy, girl. These definitions are trying to be made illegal through censorship. Families and fathers being replaced by the state. Pedophilia. Have you ever, in the last 50 years in America, ever heard this term as often as it's been used now? There's been thousands of arrests under President Trump. The president of the Young Democrats under de Blasio, mayor in New York City, he, I believe, was arrested or something happened to him regarding this particular topic. Marrying, how about the word marriage? The definition's been changed. Not just same-sex, but they're marrying children, they're marrying pets, they're marrying farm animals, they're marrying inanimate objects. Young children choosing sexual identity as young as 6 years old. I think there was a Democrat governor in Pennsylvania who okayed children showering together in school. Political correctness has absolutely gone wild, folks. I talked about the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the rule of law. Free speech and the right to protect yourself could be a thing of the past. No restitution or rights unless it's depending on what group you're in. Basically, the elite gets to protect themselves. You know, Weinstein, even Tom Hanks said, I know plenty of people like Weinstein. This is, you know, it's not just the raping of women, but it's the pedophilia that goes on by the elite. And the bottom 93% doesn't get restitution from the court system. Like when GlaxoSmithKline told me that they would not let me be a part-time job share when I got diagnosed with spinal stenosis and nerve damage, and they said it was for women only. I contacted 30 different attorneys. One of my favorite responses from the attorneys was, you have no group self-pity points as a poor/middle-class white male, heterosexual. Terrorism. The state of Maine, the ACLU, said female genital mutilation, should not be a crime. The middle class is on the chopping block. Children suing parents. This has been going on for years. And it's pretty obvious that Sharia law is being groomed into the Western world. And this is one of the reasons I cite articles that I've read, like in 10 to 30 years, all Western countries will be under Sharia law, and less than 30% of men want to get married because they've basically been kicked out of their house, they've lost custody of their children, they pay all the bills, and you look at the birth rates, the fertilization rates, the breeding rate, I don't care what terminology you use, Sharia law is dominating the Western world 8-1. Project Veritas released a video not too long ago where teachers unions were defending raping kids. The police in many Western countries, including ours, hiding statistics related to migrants regarding rape. Remember Kellyanne Conway, the Democrat congressman, looked at her when she was on her knees in the Oval Office sitting in a sofa, and he made it very clear that she looks very familiar on her knees. How about Joy Behar, protecting Bill Clinton, saying that the rape victims were all tramps. So it's pretty obvious, folks, that Sharia law is being groomed into American society. So, Vince, you mentioned who's at fault. I took the liberty, I mentioned this on the air before, but I think I need to do it again. I took the liberty of, about a month or two period of time when I read articles on financial, economic, social, and political reasons that I cited in the book about being self-sufficient. But I took that rationale and I took all the authors over about a month or two period and wrote down who the authors blamed for our lack of progress in society and lack of prosperity for the bottom 93%, especially loss of freedoms and liberties. So I'm going to mention these terms. They're nouns, adjectives, and labels. And here we go. The IMF, the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, the central banks and the Fed, the 6 big banks and the cartel, the groups who demand the bars of standards and expectations to decrease, like anything to do with political correctness and social justice warriors, the Bilderbergers, Kissinger, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Illuminati, Gates, Bezos, Soros, Clintons, NGOs, Russians, MSM, of course, mainstream media, the neocons, the establishment, the New World Order, the rhinos, the liberals, progressives, socialists, communists, Zionists, elites, aristocracy, fascists, Islam, brown shirts, mercenaries, feminists, the top wealthiest 1%, the deep state, the powers that be, the powers to be, the powers that shouldn't be, them, they. And when I did this project, I did it over, probably about half a year ago. And I could add way more adjectives, names, and labels to this. And when we get back after the break, folks, I'm going to tell you who's responsible for our loss of liberties, freedoms, and this politically correct tirade that's been taking over American thought.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it. Rich Scheben's with us. OffGridMontana.com. So, Rich Scheben, who is responsible for this mess we're in right now, the loss of freedoms, liberty, and prosperity?
Well, of course, Vincent, that long list that I gave, I could have added more labels and nouns and adjectives to that. And of course, they are partly responsible. Of course they are. I'm not saying they aren't. But the biggest responsibility for our demise as a culture, traditions, and heritage is the silent majority. In other words, us. I blame 90% on everything that's happened on us. We keep lowering the bars of standards and expectations for getting a job and keeping a job. And guess what happens? Pretty soon we reach and surpass the law of diminishing returns, where appreciation and value and everything is at risk. Nothing matters anymore. We cannot have a different set of rules, laws, and accountability for each group. We're letting political correctness and the drunkenness of Kool-Aid by political correctness create so much fear that truth doesn't even matter. This is creating a coup against the bottom 93% for the right to govern ourselves. So the land of the free, the home of the brave, is at huge risk. So this is why I feel that we all need to read, research, stand up, and share information. Because the young are being used by certain groups as mercenaries, as brown shirts, and they're not informed. We need to talk about ideas and solutions that's going to help freedom, liberty, and prosperity for the bottom 93%. Instead of creating a status quo, which I call an incognito caste system, and this is by design. We need heroes, the whistleblowers, not the leakers, the whistleblowers. We need guts. I'm not saying we don't need brain, strategy, and a plan of action, but we are desperate for guts. That's one of the reasons why athletes, actors, singers, Hollywood get paid so much, because the MO is to distract, dumb down, and divide the American people by groups. Isn't it pretty obvious that the mainstream media, and I mean all of them, They are always race baiting, gender baiting, sex, religion, ideology, generation baiting, because they need to divide us. They need to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. And the five companies who own the newspapers, the magazines, television, radio, and of course production companies and publishing companies, they also sway public opinion. Holding on to the narrative, the memes, the themes, the talking points, the microphones is absolutely what they need to do. And that's why you have honorable people like Dr. Ben Carson, who has guts. And when he came to Northwest Montana, he said this elsewhere, and he's not the first one to say this. He says he hates political correctness because it turns minorities into victims. And hence, this is why the United States of America is now referred to as the divided groups of America. And this is why we need to stand for principle, folks. And how I define principle is making sure that we have the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody, every individual, and not groups. Truth needs to be spoken. In other words, you have to be hated for telling the truth. And if somebody does it, whatever it may be, free speech is a great example, then you should be able to do it also. Okay, we need to show that group identity politics, and this is why this is so important, folks. The powers that be do everything to mask what's going on, what their plan is. Basically, they call it identity politics. That's their home run pitch. If people would realize that it really is group identity politics, a.k.a. victim group status, a.k.a. protectionist group status, you'll realize that it's media propaganda. You can't go to a movie or listen to the national media, mainstream media, without hearing every 5 seconds a subliminal message, Hegelian dialectic, professional wordsmithing. Basically, what they're doing is taking every group and they're degrading, disrespecting, and insulting the work ethic, the ability, and the intelligence, and saying, your group can't compete, your group is suboptimal. And it's done to not empower a nation, but to bring it down. To not empower a group, but to bring it down. And this is why they lower the bars of standards and expectations. Vince?
Yeah, I've got some comments. I'm in total agreement. I've got some exclamation points that I'd like to add when we come back after these commercial announcements at the bottom of the hour. Rich Scheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. Rich Scheben's with us. Rich, I've got a couple exclamation points I'd like to share with our class about what you said, and you're talking about free speech. And, you know, the bottom line is a lot of us believe that we have the right to free speech, but when you try to implement it, it doesn't always work out that way. And I'm going to give you two examples. There's an article that I was reading last night on the dailymail.co.uk. And the title of this article is Violent Moment, St. Louis. Now, that'd be St. Louis, Missouri. Violent moment, St. Louis college professor is slammed to the ground by a security guard while being thrown out of a board meeting for objecting to a no-clapping rule. It goes on to say, Steve Taylor, 53, an adjunct math professor at St. Louis Community College, was speaking out of turn at a board meeting, objecting to the rule that the audience couldn't clap after a person spoke. Now, is clapping free speech? I guess you could say it is. So, if the audience likes something that, or appreciates something that someone who's speaking says, it's common to clap. It's common. It's certainly above board. Well, the chancellor asked the security officers to remove Taylor, this 53-year-old adjunct math professor, from the meeting. And so the officer grabs Taylor from behind, slams him to the ground, and Taylor then said he received a letter from the college after the incident telling him he was no longer allowed on campus. Now, to make matters even better, the Missouri police issued 2 summonses against Taylor, alleging that he disturbed the peace and resisted arrest. Now, what really happened, I saw the video, and it's on the internet. So, Taylor, this math adjunct professor, approaches the raised platform of the board and starts talking, and the chancellor decides that he doesn't want to hear this anymore and instructs the security guard to remove him. Well, remove him, they grab him from behind, 3 of them, slam him down on the floor, handcuff him, and arrest him. Now that's an example of what happens during free speech. Now, you can look at people, you can look at pictures and say, and my wife does this all the time, that guy seems like a nice guy, that gal seems like a nice gal. Just looking at their face, the way they smile, their body language. This guy's a math professor. Now, I've never seen, ever, a violent math professor. Never. I've never seen one. Now, maybe there is such a thing, but I've never seen one. So, that's what happened to this guy. Now, let me talk about what happened to me. So, our county government in Virginia decided to put a dump on top of a 1,400-acre site at the intersection of 2 highways and a rail line. So the trash could be brought in on rail or 2 very nice high-speed highways. Perfect location for bringing trucks in. And in the Commonwealth of Virginia, trash is considered to have value. And because it has value, it can be considered interstate commerce. And you can't restrict it. So anyone who wanted to bring trash and dump it in that landfill that the county board wanted and approved could do so. Any state that touched the borders of Virginia could bring their trash in and dump it in our county. Well, some of us were frosted, and we wanted to stop it. And we couldn't figure out who sold the land and who bought the land and how it got transferred to Allied Waste. Because the page was stolen from the courthouse. But we put the pieces together and we realized that the county government people were involved in this. Bribes and payoffs and that kind of thing is what we believed. Well, one of the things that we decided to do was go to meetings. And when we attended a meeting, like a county meeting, standing room only. I mean, packed like sardines, standing room only. Every seat was taken. People were overflowing outside the building. That kind of standing room only. Well, one of the meetings I was scheduled to be the speaker. This was before my radio days. I'm just a farmer. Still am just a farmer. And this meeting was to be held at one of the public school cafeterias, the largest room in that particular public school, near where the dump was going to be. Well, standing room only again. Now, we had a right to use the public school building. All we had to do was request in advance, let them know that we're going to have a public meeting, and we were responsible for cleaning up afterward. But we paid for that darn building. It was a public school. What they did was they sent in the sheriff's department, every officer they had, in riot gear. And just as Vinny was going to go on stage and help educate those who were in attendance as to what was happening in their neighborhood, in their neck of the woods, about this dump, the county government officials grabbed the microphone and said, "This meeting is over. We have to get ready for school tomorrow. We have to prepare for classes for the children." And the police were there to enforce it. And they shut us down. So Vinny didn't get to speak. And they cited that Vinny would probably incite a riot. That's what they believed. And that's why they shut it down. But they didn't say that. They said that it was because of the children. And they needed to have their lessons tomorrow, and we need to get the building ready. That's what they said. Just all nonsense. Because we could have stayed till 3 o'clock in the morning and cleaned up after ourselves, and the children could have been there that morning. But they wouldn't let that happen. Because they knew we were in the right. And what does the government say at the data center in Utah? I'm paraphrasing. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Isn't that what it says? Something like that? Okay. So why have they been hiding the truth about the JFK assassination for all these years? Why? If they've got nothing to hide. Obviously, they do. So I wanted to share that with you. And also, another thing that I do, and Janet Napolitano taught me this, and she said, if you see something, say something. And I do. So it happens in all kinds of situations. Like, for example, if I see a police car at the bottom of a long hill, hiding, just off the side of the road, and he's got his radar gun aimed uphill so that the cars would naturally go faster and faster and faster downhill and be more likely to exceed the speed limit just because they're going downhill and gravity is pulling the car downhill. If I see something like that, I say something. I flash my lights and I tell everybody that's coming down the hill, be careful. Don't hit this police car, because it'd be terrible to have that policeman injured, because he's barely visible. I'd hate to see a car hit him. So I warn everybody, be careful, be careful, be careful. So when I see something like that, I say something. Another instance, just a few weeks ago, I was at the Farmers Cooperative, and that's where farmers buy grain and things like that. And I pulled in, and there's a front door, and I pulled off about 15 or 20 spaces where you can pull head on facing the building. And it's a small, narrow parking lot. And so if you pull head in, the back of your pickup truck is probably 5 feet away from the road. So there's not a lot of distance between the tailgate and the road of traffic on this particular road where the Farmers Cooperative is. So I pull there, and I don't park in front of the front door because I figure that someone might be coming and they need that space to walk in. So I park just off the area where people should be walking. It's just a common courtesy. So a Federal Express truck pulls behind me and blocks my view. It's a big box truck. Blocks my view so I can't see to back up. Well, my family and I left the Farmers Cooperative, getting our vehicle to head back out to our farm, and this truck is blocking our view. The Federal Express driver follows us and gets out of the building, goes into his truck, sits behind the wheel, and he's texting, typing. And so Vinny waits. Finally, Vinny's had it. Gets out of his vehicle, says, "Hey!" And I whistle. Really loud. "You're blocking traffic." I'm talking about lack of courtesy. Federal Express. Who's that driver think he is? What's he doing blocking traffic anyway? What's he doing parking, where there's no parking space? There are plenty of parking spaces. But he didn't think that was suitable for him. So he had to block everybody's view. So when I see something, I say something. Now, what do the people at the Farmers Cooperative think of me? They think I'm nuts. Who am I yelling at this Federal Express driver? He's just doing his job. He's a real nice guy. He smiles and waves. What I'm saying is, when I see something, I say something. And it doesn't make friends in most instances. So I want to share that with you.
May I comment?
Please do.
Well, first of all, with what you said earlier, clapping is a form of affirmation, confirmation, praise. When the globalist ideology touts their agenda, they love praise, as long as it isn't against their agenda. And I hear the music, and I will comment further after the break.
I'd love to hear it. Rich Scheben. We'll be right back. OffGridMontana.com with Rich Scheben. Rich, I was talking about free speech and how it gets stomped on in public meetings, and I believe that these public meetings are a sham in many cases. The agenda is already worked out. The decisions are already worked out beforehand. And these people who sit up on a raised platform have already talked about in private, in secret, how they're going to vote. And they all vote in unison in many cases. And they hang together so they won't hang separately. And you kind of wonder, how can these people make such bad decisions? Are they really that stupid? And so I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand, how it works. And I've seen the police enforcement side of it where they have let us know that we will be arrested for exercising our free speech rights, or what we thought were rights. Please continue with your comments.
Well, I was alluding to that it all depends on what group you come from, regarding getting a job, keeping a job. Is there a joke in the hallway? How about a crime? Who's the victim? Who's the perp? Who has victim group status? Who's the hater? When HR and the attorneys come out of the woodwork, before any of this stuff gets public or any discovery is made, everybody, the first thing the average American thinks of is who said it? Who did it? What group are they from? Now, if you come from the elite, you can be a traitor, sedition, espionage, doesn't matter. It's pretty obvious that, and it's not just George Soros, a lot of the wealthy are fomenting division and funding both sides of extremism. That's why I think most people have woken up to the fact that it's not a left-right paradigm, and ideology is only a small part of it. It's truly the aristocracy versus the serfs. So if you're somebody who says double standards, hypocrisy, that's the way it is, that'll never change, you're basically a globalist, bought and paid for person. You're the poster boy or poster girl for ignorance, apathy, and indifference. You're drunk on the Kool-Aid of political correctness. And this is why I always talk about practice what you preach laws. If we did this, folks, it's pretty obvious that there's so much information out there that the whole system is rigged. We're really running off of admiralty or maritime law of the seas, and we're incorporated, okay? And without going into much detail, basically it's the managers and the slaves, okay? So that's why they want to divide us, distract them down, divide us. That's why Hollywood and the football players, and they make lots of money because they are used as goons to distract the public, okay, and dumb us down and divide us. So when I talk about practice what you preach laws, how many people do you know in the elite circles who are pro-Common Core, but yet they send their kids to private school? How many of these elite people and their talking heads on the mainstream media want gun confiscation, but yet they have the audacity to hire bodyguards to carry guns to protect their ass? At the same time, a lot of these people who are in public service are using the taxpayer dollars who are anti-gun to hire security guards to protect them. It's unbelievable. How about the carbon footprint? Look at all these actors who are flying around the country on private jets and public jets, living in big houses, often have multiple homes around the country. The carbon footprint is 10,000 times the average Joe. And they're saying we need to reduce our carbon footprint. Folks, what we need to do, and I've been saying this for years on the air, on many a radio station, we need to have practice what you preach laws. And why do you think even the elite, who are so-called on the right, isn't saying this? Because they don't want to lose their power, their clout. It's an addiction to power, money, and control. It's an addiction, folks. And until we have practice what you preach laws, nothing's going to change for the bottom 93%. We will continue to have this incognito caste system if we don't come to the realization that it's not a left-right paradigm.
Right. And if you see something, class, say something. Speak up. Speak out. You can do it politely. You don't have to do it exactly the way I do it. But if you see something, say something. And unless they see that there's a resistance, they'll just step up their game. Rich Scheben, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it. Class, above all, honesty and integrity.